Yeah.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Romper Room. 227 weeks of this craziness. And we just lost Jack. I don't know why. He was talking about soccer. And my son, Josiah, is on with us. Can't wait to introduce you to him. Um, he is the most knowledgeable person I know on the planet, and that's me. There probably are other people, but who really understand groundwater, who understand taking care of our planet and being good stewards. And the reason we have him on here today is because with all these floods, like now we just got hit with Milton down in Florida, we're still dealing with it, and we're going to be dealing with it for months and maybe years up in the Western North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, etc. So I wanted to have him on here, and Jack and Adam said, hey, great idea if we can get him. So I'm wearing my Kentucky t-shirt. Thank you. One of my Christmas gifts from my son and his family. But before we go into this, as people are getting on here, just as a reminder, hit us with the Q&A. If you got questions, go there. If you want to harass us, hit us on the chat, but do not just go easy on my son. I'd like to have him come back here again. He could take it. He is a defender as a soccer player, so he can take it. But I'm just saying, you can hit Jack and Adam all you want. Adam it's great to have him back. The lightning got him up, and his family and son moved up into somewhere in, was it Brooklyn, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
Brooklyn. Brooklyn, New York. And he made it back. The lightning didn't strand him, which is a good thing. We're thankful for that. And Jack, always good to have you back too. So before we unleash the hounds and we start talking about, hey, what are these floodwaters? What are the impacts to our environment, to our drinking water, to even Lake Norman, where stuff is rolling down into Lake Lure, which, it looks like it's got, boards and crap spewing all over this once beautiful lake. Like, what happens in, how do we know, what are the impacts to our drinking water, but also to these beautiful natural resources that we've loved and now are kind of screwed up. So, even timelines, what does that look like? And things that you can do in case you have to weather a storm, because Josiah, he has some stories. They went days and I think over a week without power in Kentucky a year ago. And so he dutifully said, I'm not going to do that again. And so he's got some pretty funny stories with taking care of 4 kids while his wife was up in Chicago when they had 3 or 4 days without power again this time, but he was prepared. Good soldier. So anyway, Jack, Adam, free for all, jump ball. Who wants to take it first?
I'll be quick, Jack, selfishly, because I know you got some good stuff. I guess, a couple things, Gary. One is the people that have, people that know people that have been impacted in Western North Carolina, and then also, now impacted in Florida. I mean, they were impacted in Florida under Helene too, and also in Georgia and some other states. Just a reminder, we covered off on the EIDL loan back during the PPP and the CARES days a lot. And I suppose I probably had heard of the thing before, COVID, but at COVID, we got ourselves real educated on it because it helped out a lot of our clients. It's just a reminder that program has been around for a while with the Small Business Administration, especially for disasters like this. So I'm sure they're going to have a website open for Milton if they don't already. They have a website open for Helene. So, people can start start the application process now, to get funding, subject to, I would say, very similar provisions to the EIDL program under COVID. The dollar limits are pretty much the same. The needs analysis is going to be, we believe, pretty much the same. I didn't double check to see, okay, on the EIDL loans associated with COVID, they waived some of the personal guarantee requirements. I'd assume they probably did not waive those in this case. So just, we'd encourage people to, get out there with the resources that are available, to the extent that they can and have connectivity. From what I saw from the website, the physical, there's two components. There's a physical damage component, and then there's also, hey, I actually just lost because I had to be shut down type component. There is a window of cutoff for the physical damages, I think at the end of November, just to put on people's radar. And then the other piece of it will layer into place. I think it expires like in the summer of next year. So just, keep that in mind, if you've been impacted, or people that have been impacted, as a resource that's available. I'm not, there may be some grants that are out there. I'm currently not aware of any, but that's because I haven't gone digging very far at this point. So it's just a reminder. And then the second thing is we get closer to the election, for our client base, I put together an email around, hey, just a reminder about the tax rate changes. If the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires. And I didn't double check my new BFF's calculations on ChatGPT, but they look directionally correct. And my girlfriend did confirm pretty much what we've been telling people. There will have to be an act of Congress, regardless of party, to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. If it were to expire, there will be an 8% rate increase for the average S corporation or partnership business owner, period. So I ran a scenario based on, hey, what's an S corporation making, 600 grand in flow through income? That's going to be, 40-ish $1,000 tax increase if this thing goes away. And again, it'll take an affirmative act of Congress to actually do something about it, with either party in place. Who kind of knows what'll happen. The Harris plan calls for keeping it in place. Like, they don't say it explicitly, but they call for keeping it in place because they don't want to make any changes to anybody making below 400 grand. They just want to make it better, not worse, for people below 400 grand. And presumably it would phase out above 400 grand. And Trump's version has been assuming he would extend it and then do other things beyond just that. I think that the thing that I would say, hey, just stay tuned, is that the House overwhelmingly passed in a broad show of bipartisan support some tax cuts, specifically related to extending depreciation, but because it had a benefit increase that was in it around the child care tax, the Senate Republicans shut it down. So you have House Republicans overwhelmingly passed it, Senate Republicans shut it down. So I just, I could see a scenario where, regardless of who's in power in Congress, depending on how the package is put together, it might not make it out of the Senate to then become law. So that's a long way of saying, regardless of party, hey, everybody say hi to Chewy if you can hear a bunking.
Chewy.
Yeah, that's a long way of saying, just plan on not blowing the 8%. Meaning, like, if I'm living paycheck to at 600 grand, you know, like I get it, you know, you can still live paycheck to paycheck on 600 grand, but if I'm living paycheck to paycheck now, you know, I need to start thinking about how do I live on paycheck to paycheck less 8% going forward. Like it wouldn't hurt just to save the money, you know, start saving the money now. So you just, hey, this is what it would feel like if this was to happen. Because chances are probably something's going to change to the, regardless of how it's packaged, you know, something will change to the not good, you know. So because I don't see I don't see either party actively pushing to further reduce government revenues. Like they may say, oh, there's been, you know, we're giving you a tax break, but we changed something over here that you're not going to see, which is just keeping it the same, you know. So I just, you know, so I just would plan on something happening that's not going to be positive, regardless of party. And that would be an easy way to start preparing myself for what it would feel like. Sort of like Gary doing his Murph in the 50-pound weight vest, you know, when he does the
It's only a
Murph with that.
20.
Sorry. What was I thinking? When he does the Murph without the weight vest, he crushes it.
It's a lot better. It's a lot more fun.
Yeah.
Without the vest.
Yeah.
All right, my turn.
Hey, yeah, before we jump into that, Adam and I were at an all-day Vistage event, kind of a big summit yesterday, and they had an economist on there that I thought, like, there was one slide that was terrifying and enlightening at the same time, and they showed these massive increases in spending during COVID, obviously, right, with all the PPP, all that stuff, but the same level of increase in government spending has happened in the last, under this administration too, and it's like out of control. And that's our big danger. That's where they were saying, danger, Will Robinson, prepare for a cataclysmic depression. I hope she is wrong in 2030. She said, and people are like, well, do you think, is there anything that we can do? And like, the spending has been so high. So I'm like, okay, prepare. But the issue is we have a spending issue, and we've had it on both sides. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Jack, as you take your swig of coffee and unmute, take it.
I also put my jacket on because I feel like this shirt is one of those ones that does the weird things and hurts people's eyes. So
You mean before, instead of the gray hoodie and that baseball hat?
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Didn't mean to step up
thanks,
the dress code. Sorry.
Well,
sorry.
I'm going to be preparing for my half Ironman later on this afternoon, Jack. Thus, I thought it was not prudent to waste water twice. You know, just kidding.
That's true. Yeah, it's all good. You're true to the environment. All right.
Yeah.
So a couple things. One is I want to share some extension deadlines that the IRS has put out there. So some of you may know, if you were impacted by Tropical Storm Debbie, that certain deadlines were postponed until February 3rd of 2025. Those have been pushed to May 1st, 2025, as have many other deadlines. So the range is deadlines falling after September 25th and before May 1st are granted additional time through May 1st of 2025. So that, and it's effective individuals and businesses, we'll talk about in a second. So this applies to individuals who had a valid extension to file their 23 return, which would be due in 5 days from now.
Right.
However, tax payments related to these returns were due on April 15th. So you were supposed to pay, you know, what you estimated and then, you know, kind of true up. So those are not, the actual payment is not eligible for relief. Calendar year corporations whose 23 extensions run out on October 15th. Those have also been extended. And then kind of prospectively, the May 1st deadline applies to quarterly estimated tax payments that are due on January 15th and April 15th. subject to any holidays that are there. And then May 1st also applies to quarterly payroll and excise tax returns normally due on October 31st of 24, January 31, and April 30th. So there is an actual, and I'm reading off of an announcement off of the IRS website that I found. So all of that information is there if you didn't get it. You don't necessarily have to rewind the tape on this. So wanted to share those. And, you know, also I should say, affected taxpayers are those who live in businesses, including tax-exempt organizations whose principal place of business is located in the covered disaster area. And there's a list of what those are. Taxpayers not in the covered disaster area, but whose records necessary to meet deadlines listed for these various filings are in the covered disaster area, they're also entitled to relief. So if you have records that were up in the mountains or elsewhere, Florida, that are needed to file the stuff, then you're also granted the extension until May 1st. So a little bit of Cliff Clavin stuff, but relevant. I also want to address, you know, there's these rumors about FEMA denying access or preventing people from helping. And while I have kind of secondhand knowledge of that situation, it's not as they have portrayed it in the media. It's not that FEMA is standing at the gates of the city of Asheville with armed guards saying, drop your stuff here and do not go any further. And that has been portrayed in the news. I think what is actually happening is that they're trying to control access. And it's not even really FEMA that does this, it's local law enforcement, but the law enforcement is saying we're just following federal orders. So ultimately FEMA is going to get the blame or the accusations that this is happening. And so they're just trying to make sure that everybody doesn't just pile up and create problems going up there and trying to allocate stuff. Now, I will say that, and it's someone who both of you guys know, that was telling me, and he is directly involved in the efforts by using some of his aircraft to do it, as his neighbors are using their aircraft as well to fly stuff up there, and that they are being, FEMA officials are saying, okay, yeah, you know, leave the stuff here and we'll handle it. And like, no, we're going to make sure this gets to where we intend to get it to. And so there's friction there. But the FEMA has put out a myth buster kind of thing. And so a couple things from there is FEMA is not asking for cash donation or turning away volunteers. Well, that's, you know, a perspective, I think, as far as the turning away volunteers. They're not confiscating donations. They don't distribute based on demographic characteristics. They don't, oh, there was apparently a myth that if FEMA comes in and does an assessment and your property is not livable, that they just take it from you and then compensate you for that. That isn't how that works. And there's also, they are just basically dropping $750 checks with people and just to give them something to get by. That is not the maximum extent of the help that you're going to get. Now, I also understand that FEMA's response has been slower than others wanted. And then the state's excuse is that, well, we don't want to deploy resources if the feds are supposed to be doing it and paying for it. So I've heard all kinds of things. And again, as I've done before is, yeah, everybody's pointing the finger at everybody else. And it depends what radio station or television network you're listening to in the moment, as far as who is doing bad things and who is being the superheroes of saving everyone who needs help. So those few things to share, but I'll leave it at that because obviously we want to hear more about what's going on environmentally and everything else.
Excellent updates. All right. So Josiah, so for anybody that's come on a little bit late, my oldest son, Josiah Frey, who went to University of Kentucky and didn't even know, go Big Blue, and he's representing in his blue, and I decided I'm going to just wear Kentucky. But the University of Kentucky much to our surprise, and even to Josiah's, the first semester was like, they have the best natural resource conservation management program in the country. And that happened to be where Josiah's affinity resided. And he stayed in Lexington, Kentucky since he went to school there, and has raised their 4 little children, not so little in some cases, with his wife. And he's done consulting in this world, working with, trying to keep coal mines, making sure that their streams and groundwaters were clean according to EPA, et cetera. And he's done work with cell towers, negotiating stuff with Indian tribes and that sort of thing. And he really understands what's going on. And now he's working for the state of Kentucky. And you could talk a little bit more about what your purview is there, Josiah. But the reason we wanted to have him on here was because seeing just all the junk, like, it's one thing to see cars going down, but it's another thing to see tanks of stuff, like who knows what, entire buildings just being carried away, and seeing shipping containers wrapped around steel beams like pretzels because of the power of the water. Like, what is going into this water, and what's this thing like what happens, and from an environmental standpoint, because we all care about it. And so, Josiah, what I'd love to do is just have you kind of expand, because you guys have experienced this in Kentucky, and water is a really big deal there, because if anybody drinks Kentucky bourbon, I don't, but I know people love it. And it's just fire water to me, but there's an art to it, evidently, and I don't have the palate for it, but evidently the water is a big deal. So Josiah, let's talk about, all right, this is what's happened. What's it going to be like, and how do we even know what's safe and what's not safe?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll start off by giving a quick disclaimer. As a public servant, these are the perspectives expressed are my own, right? Not necessarily the public
He
agency.
does work for the government.
I do work for the government. Yeah, so like just kind of a background of what I do and where I've kind of been. I work for the Kentucky Division of Water in our in the director's office on our nutrient reduction and success strategy. It's a big mouthful. Everything I do is a mouthful. It's acronyms and all sorts of fun stuff. But I work with the Federal Hypoxia Task Force and some different, we collaborate across states, and primarily we're working with agriculture and wastewater utilities, stormwater development, that sort of thing. Previous to the Division of Water, I worked in consulting for about a decade, everything from coal mine monitoring and biological monitoring to air permitting, oil spill contingency plans, cell tower development, residential development, everything kind of under the sun, industrial work. And I've also, was on the ground about eight months after Katrina in New Orleans, in college, and doing some very rudimentary cleanup stuff. I can say, in Kentucky, this is, we've seen some very similar things in the past couple of years to what North Carolina is experiencing right now. I mean, we had a flood in Eastern Kentucky in the mountains in, I believe it was July of 2021 or 2022. And we had tornadoes in December of 2021 in Western Kentucky. So both sides of our state saw very different disasters within about a year of each other, year and a half. And the response was, it was extensive. There's a lot of work, and especially, it's one thing when you have floodwaters in coastal areas. It's very different when it is in the mountains. And we saw similar things. It's not quite on the scale of what you all are seeing now. But yeah, I mean, the flooding was extensive, and the recovery tail has been long. I mean, we're still working in those areas. I think, there's been concerted coalition of everybody coming together to really make sure that what needs to get done gets done. There's been a significant push in getting people into higher ground communities. That's a big focus of the state agencies, and it has been for about 2 years. Because in our part of the world, you had a lot of people living right along the rivers, and we have floods pretty regularly. You'd have a flood come through, but it would never be quite that bad, and everybody kind of rebuilds what was kind of damaged and you move on. But when it literally takes everything away and there's nothing left, it's a completely different scenario. So I mean, there was a relief fund that was set up, then they went after community development block grants with HUD, and so they're still doing some of that. They've used that to rebuild communities in the upper areas on top of mountains. Sometimes they're mountaintop removal areas where you've had coal mines in the past. But yeah, I mean, if you with the lakes, that's a little different too. I can say that one of the things that we did in coordination with our DOT, with our state Department of Transportation, is because a lot of our creeks ran along those roads, which I suspect is pretty similar to what's happening in North Carolina. A lot of those roads are gone. Well, a lot of those roads also happen to be where you co-locate utilities. You've got water lines, you've got sewer lines that go underneath those roads, and so those are gone. But also, you have to stabilize those banks just to put anything back. And so it was probably, I went and did some drive-by windshield analysis of some of these areas about a year on, where they're going through and they're cleaning the pieces of homes and things out of these creeks, kids' toys, all that stuff with backhoes and things, to try and get that back out of the floodplain so it doesn't keep washing down, and then they're regrading those banks so that they're stable, so that, because that's the first step before you then go in and rebuild your infrastructure. The infrastructure investment is significant. It really is. But yeah, it's from what I've seen, it's a very methodical process. You come in, you rebuild, and in terms of water quality, that's a multifaceted approach. With groundwater, when you have water go over groundwater wells, you then typically need to sanitize those again. And that's fairly straightforward. The health departments are pretty good about facilitating that. Drinking water, the plants usually get up relatively quickly, and then it's just a matter of rebuilding all your infrastructure to get back out to folks. But those drinking water utilities, they know how to treat. We have a guy in the building who used to work in Florida. He said, yeah, our down in Florida, the water was almost black that we would treat, and then it'd come out crystal clear because they have the tools to be able to do it. And so,
Wow.
Activated carbon, that sort of thing, it does wonders, and it does what it's supposed to do. So they're no strangers to that.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm curious. This is kind of a survival thing, but you see these people taking these straws of life or whatever they're called. I don't know. They're something on Amazon. I think you could even get it probably, but I'm assuming it's charcoal in those things, but to see them pull something out of a stream and then be able to is that legit, do you think?
I mean, there's different ways of treating water. For example, in our little emergency preparedness kit, we've got little tablets you put in water, and mostly all that's doing is addressing the bacteria in the water. That's killing bacteria, but it's not necessarily removing metals and things like that. Some of those filter membranes, I think that's what you're talking about. Sometimes those will filter out some of that, but they may not be designed to do specifically. There's always limitations to any sort of treatment process where it's kind of like a single stage, or, because
Yeah.
a drinking water utility is multiple stages. You've got bacterial, you've got grit removal, you've got different things that are in there designed to take it out. I mean, I've been in wastewater plants where they, we just had a event for clean water professionals, and they make a alcoholic beverage based off of the wastewater plant. It comes out clean enough that they make it out of the wastewater plant, so they can do that stuff, but they've got serious equipment to be able to do it. So in terms of what's available on the private market, there's a number of different things, and it just depends on what you're looking to do, what your constituents and concern really are, in trying to prepare for that. Typically, in a disaster situation, the most important thing is you're looking at bacteria, the things that would be in gut microbes in the animals, because you've got bacteria in the water, typically, just, and it usually flushes out, but that's typically what is of most concern and the initial cut through. Some of those things do work. It's just a matter of what you're trying to treat.
Yeah, with bodies and animals and stuff from pastures, all of those things, man, that can't be good.
Sure.
Just thinking about Lake Lure, for example, where it's just filled with all this junk. Like, how do they get that stuff out, and what's the process? I mean, obviously human life is the first and foremost thing, right? But then as they start going back into these resources, I mean, is it dredging and hauling away, and then, like, I'm assuming big stuff then working on down, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, a lake is probably going to be, it'll probably be a little different than some of the rivers like that we saw. But yeah, I mean, you're going to have equipment that's going to be probably mechanically removing a lot of that stuff. You may see some seining, with some nets and things like that, like they do with, cordoning it off and trying to get in a certain area so that they can then take it from land and get it off. And then, that goes into a number of different places. They have specific disposal facilities for like construction debris. And then they have other facilities that are general, and then they have some that are high hazard. And without knowing specifically what's there, I'm not exactly sure which of those categories it would land in. But like I said, when we were cleaning out and restabilizing the creeks here after those floods, you had backhoes on the banks that were pulling that stuff out, loading it onto trucks, and getting rid of it, in a permitted sort of situation. I think I'm always kind of amazed at how quickly nature tends to rebound. I've been in mine sites from very different stages of development, and it's always kind of surprising, sometimes even a couple of years after something has been completely pulled apart, that it looks as green as it does. So I think those things come back fairly quickly. It's just a matter of sometimes there's nuisance species that you don't want back, and got to manage for those, but they were here to begin with. So
yeah. Jack, you've got a hand raised.
I do. All right. So overheard a conversation and didn't want to butt in because I didn't know the answer to it, but it was someone discussing whether they should go to the Whitewater Center and get on the Catawba River because they're not sure if all that stuff has trickled its way down to us. And then they were talking about, okay, well, what even about Lake Norman, Lake Wiley, Mountain Island Lake, and I believe they're all, dammed up, right? And so I don't know if there's maybe there is a natural flow as well that comes through, but I would think the distance between and the flow of water, even if it were contiguous, meaning it flows all the way from the mountains all the way into South Carolina, that you know, a lot of that stuff, that bad stuff, the overflow and bacteria and everything else, maybe wouldn't have made its way down here. But I have no idea if that is
Mm.
true or false or a myth. Do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on your local topography. Without knowing specifically, I mean, I'm somewhat familiar with Catawba River and where that is because I used to play near it as a kid. Um, but the, there's usually a flow of water and you can generally track where things are. There's USGS gauges typically along rivers and you can kind of see the progression of where, water comes in and then how it recedes. And you're right, there is a progression downstream. Depending on the dams, some of that, they may hold some of that debris back. And water tends to, as you have more water kind of come in, it's probably gonna dilute what would have come down. Your greatest concentrations are probably not going to be making it all the way down. They're going to be filtering out. But what I would, I can speak to what we have in Kentucky. We have an ambient monitoring network, and we have data that gets pushed out periodically. But then there's also USGS gauges, which typically have real-time monitoring, and sometimes they will even have real-time, not just water stage, but they'll have not chemical analysis, but they'll have like an optical sensor that's on there. Like in Kentucky, we have some that monitor nitrate, then they monitor dissolved oxygen and pH, and you can see those fluctuations in real time. And that may be a good place to kind of look at where you're seeing certain things come through, is looking at some of those, maybe the USGS, they're called super gauges, is what. And they operate a large monitoring network. I'm not specifically sure where those all are in North Carolina. Typically, if there's some sort of a beach, you have public access. I know in Kentucky we have like if there's an E. coli contamination or something that spikes above recreation standards, they'll put out a beach notification. And if you've got large areas where people are going to, I would suspect that they have something similar, some sort of notification. But usually the best places to go are on those state or federal websites, because typically, and sometimes you have to look for a little bit. And it's kind of like anything with Google, you know the keywords, and so you look for the keywords, and then and go from there. Is typically what I would suggest. So I'd look at monitoring, gauging, real-time analysis, see what kind of resources are available. And from what I do know, North Carolina, there is a robust program with monitoring and that sort of thing in those areas.
Yeah, I would assume so. I was thinking, and I feel bad for thinking this. I'm like, okay, they were kind of complaining about bacteria, potential bacteria, but it sounds like that they are familiar with and have been to the Whitewater Center to go paddle boarding and maybe boating and stuff like that. So they've been in the water. And I thought that, well, it's much worse to be, they're already nuclear wastewater contaminated. And that's why they, many long-term residents of Charlotte kind of glow a little extra in the dark at nighttime. So, they're already there. So what's a little bacteria, right? So.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I have a general rule with my kids. My general rule with my kids, because we have like a volunteer monitoring network in Kentucky. We have people that go and take bacteria samples, and there's one down the street from me, right? So I don't know the person's name. I don't know where they are. Or I do know where they are. We got a spring there, and I can see what those bacteria counts are. My general rule with my kids is 24, sometimes 48 hours after a major rain event, don't get in the water, typically. Now, the whitewater guys love that. So they're the first ones out there. I got a colleague, he's the first one out there. I'm like, that's fine. You're not a child. So
Yeah.
he's out there whitewatering. He knows what he's doing. But that's my, personal recommendation with my children. And that's partly because we have wastewater lines right next to the, the park. It's part of the reason why there's a park there.
Yeah. I'm curious, Josiah, it's one thing when you've got stormwater, going over roads where you've got oil, a little bit of oil, but it's not the same as, the Jiffy Lube that just got tanked, and all of the antifreeze and all of the oil deposits and all that kind of stuff. Now, all of a sudden, it's washed into this torrent running through Asheville and various parts of that part of the country. Debris and, boards and that kind of stuff and shingles, that's one thing. But man, benzene, any of these chemicals, those are the things that I worry about. Like what does the government or anybody that's in charge of like trying to help kind of clean that stuff up, what do they do?
Well, there's a lot of testing that goes on, especially after an event. I think in Kentucky we've got an emergency response team. We've got different people from different agencies, and now Kentucky, we're a small state relative to North Carolina, and so there's a lot of monitoring that happens, especially we have a release or a spill. We had a bourbon fire, and there was a lot of testing that went on after that. Because you have to quantify what's happened. So you'll have that sort of thing. You'll have a good bit of monitoring that's going on, and then that coordination will go up and down. So it's a way of trying to make sure that what's going on is being monitored in real time. Now, the one thing that I typically look at when I'm not sure of an area and what's going on, EPA's got something called an ECHO database. And what it does is it shows all the permitted facilities in an area. So you can pull up a map and zoom in and you can see what all the permitted facilities are. And that's everything from a school septic system to a manufacturing plant. You'll have all those there. And that's a good way of determining what your constituents of concern might be in a particular area. Now, Asheville is a decent sized city, so you're going to have all sorts of things there. I'm not particularly sure about what their industrial base looks like, but you've got cars and all sorts of things there. That being said, you had a tremendous amount of water, and that tends to dilute a lot of things. How much dilution, I'm not really sure. But there will likely be groundwater monitoring that will go on, and you've got all your gas stations. Most of them already have groundwater monitoring going on they've always had it. That's part of the ASD program. So you've got a number of different ways of being able to track that, both from a state and federal agency and local agencies too. Local health departments have some of those capabilities. I'm not sure if I answered that question.
It's just like, what do they do? Okay, so they're monitoring and they're hoping that it dilutes, and whether minerals in the ground that help naturally filter before it goes into the aquifers or whatever. Right. I think those are I guess the things, because it's like, well, I just was unclear as to like, what do they do? And if it's a spill in the Gulf of Mexico, then they
boom it,
put buoys around, and they skim it and clean it and all that kind of stuff. But this is different. It's careening down, and I guess to your point, dilution and kind of natural filtering, if you will. One of the things that I want to make sure that we do that I thought was pretty interesting, because we had gone to see my other son in Denver, Colorado, as tornado sirens were going off here on Thursday. And as we get out, And then we are monitoring what's going on. And the next day is like, holy moly. And then I see Josiah is in the dark, and I knew that Callie was in Chicago, and he was taking care of kids from 12 to 3, I guess. And so I'm like, oh man. But you're in the dark, and so you were without power, but you
Yeah.
had your emergency bin. You'd gone out and done a generator situation where you could power certain things. You know, it wasn't a whole house like a Generac or something like that. But I'd be curious as to, go back to what you experienced with that windstorm that took most of Lexington offline for a good bit. And then what did you do, and how did you, like you said you went to FEMA guidelines and stuff like that as you were building your kit, but talk a
Yeah,
little bit about that.
sure. Well, before we go into that, I guess one thing one thought I did have about treatment on the back end, there's ways of treating lakes, ponds, big reservoirs. There's different ways of doing that. Like for example, within our programs with nutrients, you can use an alum-based sulfate and different things that will treat different constituents. In groundwater wells, I've been on remediation projects where you're injecting activated carbon into the ground, and that's addressing some really interesting things. There's whole series of treatment technologies out there. So those things exist. Which ones specifically, I'm not exactly sure. But I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. All right,
Um,
cool.
yeah, in terms of preparedness, we have our emergency kit, right? Like, I went into ready.gov, and I basically went through the different scenarios. I mean, in Kentucky, we have concerns with earthquakes because of the New Madrid fault, and that has historically been a serious concern. So I've got a natural gas shutoff, kind of valve lever that sits strapped to the natural gas meter. And so if something were to happen, I rip that thing off and I turn it off. Like I said, we've got a generator, we've got water, food, we've got a tent, right? If something happens to the house, we know that we can move, and we've got a tent, some place for everybody to stay. Alternative sources of heating and cooling. So we've got the generator can power a standalone AC unit or standalone heater, wood for fires, that sort of thing, food. But I think one of the most important things that people can overlook is simple things when you're offline. So for example, in our kit, I've got a notebook that has phone numbers that I don't remember. If my phone's dead, I need to try and get a hold of somebody, I've got phone numbers, addresses, and kind of what do we do if the water goes off? Where are our alternative water sources? What do we do with that? We have a creek down the street. We've got some tablets to be able to address at least some of the bacteria in it. Simple things like if your system backs up and you no longer have wastewater service, do you have a shovel, right? Like, or a compost bucket? Simple things
Yeah.
like that. Nobody wants to talk about it, but it's real. And people in disaster situations, that is a very real thing, and that's how we've had outbreaks of cholera and other things in our historical past, and we don't want to repeat that. Yeah, so it's just a matter of figuring out what you might encounter and then preparing for those sort of scenarios. We tend to have power outages and ice storms, just because we're kind of a weird latitude with a number of different things. So yeah, I mean, just preparing, if we needed to leave, do we know where we would go? Do we have a physical map that would show us where roads are? If your GPS is offline, if your cell towers are offline, I know you've mentioned some satellite technologies; those can be helpful. So yeah, that's kind of some of the work that we've done as a family to prepare. I know at the office we have these emergency, we have a call line of all the people. If there's an issue, we have a list of people to call and who to contact, and make sure that we're checking in on our people. As a public agency, and I'm sure that applies to business as well, checking on your staff, and having those emergency phone trees set up, I think is probably a pretty good practice.
Yeah. We've talked a lot on this program in the 226 weeks prior to this one about even succession planning and the importance of documenting stuff, because like the whole impetus of this thing was COVID, which none of us had, any idea, and it changed many things. And I think that that's just another one of those things where Jack, as his lawyer self says, like you got to document, you got to document and document again, it's like, keep records and that sort of thing. So I think that's really helpful. Before we finish up at the top of the hour, anybody that's on here, you guys have any questions? It's free for all, jump ball for Josiah, Adam, Jack, or myself. And it can deal with this or something else that, you want some free opinions.
I have a question.
Not advice.
Yeah. So, I'm not asking for the legal answer, more of kind of perspective, and you may not be able to answer this, but let's say that, so my question is, what responsibility would a business owner have knowing that something is coming their way, like a flood, and they have some of the chemicals that we were talking about, Gary had mentioned, okay, businesses that store chemicals as routine for their business, but, is there, maybe it's more of what would be potentially the expectations of the government for a business owner to be responsible with alternatively storing things like chemicals at higher ground to help prevent it being put into the environmental system, the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So in one of my past lives, I worked on oil spill contingency plans. And then we had something in Kentucky, it's called a GPP, a groundwater protection plan. And typically with some of those sort of plans are designed to deal with certain more common scenarios, like a 100-year flood, or you're talking about a release or an upset. And so typically you'll have, there is a, depending on the requirements, the different types of constituents you have, you may have requirements depending on the state or federal rules for secondary containment, that sort of thing. And you may not always, it may not be the things you're necessarily thinking about. I mean, I could think about examples of oil that wasn't petroleum oil, right? That was stored in large containers, and those had secondary containment. But you can't necessarily move those. If you've got totes, it's a little different. Sometimes your building can serve as secondary containment. But as far as moving them in advance of a flood, I'm not sure I can answer that, because that would be a programmatic specific requirement. But I do know that some of the more common requirements are the SP, it's called an SPCC plan, oil spill contingency plan. In Kentucky, we've got a groundwater protection plan that you may have something similar in North Carolina. I'm not particularly sure.
That was a very lawyerly question, Jack.
Hey,
I was
listen,
trying not to make it lawyerly. I was like,
But it was
I should have
good.
said,
I mean, you
let's
think
say
like a lawyer, 'cause you are one.
hypothetically, you have a business owner that stores stuff on the first floor, but has the ability to store something on the second floor, and he or she doesn't. Will the government come back and say, okay, you know what? That has a negative impact on our willingness to assist you, because you were, and I say this because Adam hasn't used this term today yet, you were a dumbass and didn't move your stuff upstairs. So
Yeah, that's a very general specific question, and in all fairness, I'm not sure I can answer that. But like I said, those general plans are there are some more universal requirements that are in place. Whether that would apply in that situation, I couldn't tell you.
yeah, it sounds like maybe not for the ordinary kind of man or woman essentially, but maybe if it's a company that has, you know, like it's a Jiffy Lube or something that they would have, in order to be permitted to have those chemicals on site, they probably have to comply with certain regulations in order to get their you know, certificate of occupancy or business license or something along those lines, I would imagine.
Yeah, there's standard practices that are common to different industries.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just one of those deals, like, you know, when we had Rob Squatrigli on last week talking about, you know, well, the exclusions from insurance, right? Well, most of these people didn't have flood insurance. Why? Well, because, you know, most people, if there's a hurricane, they're heading to the mountains. You know, it's like a 1,000-year flood. Most people didn't have it, and so, you know, you're out of luck on any of that stuff. And I think in some ways you could regulate this thing to oblivion, to where, you know, we all walk around in bubble wrap because, yeah, walking across the street, or, you know, falling down a stair or whatever, where, you know, stuff just happens that's completely out of the norm. And sometimes you just can't prepare for every situation. But I like, you know, I was, you know, really pleased to see what you had done, Josiah, and you challenged me like, oh man, we need to probably go to another level for our household, just because stuff happens. You know, you guys experienced something, you did something about it, you were prepared, and you made it through. So, you know,
yeah, and simple things like having, you know, we cooked and we made our coffee on the gas grill, right? So before any storm comes, I'm making sure I'm refilling on propane. You know, it doesn't cost me that much, but it helps me sleep at night. In terms of disaster recovery, one thing I will say, when we were in Katrina, I was in New Orleans about 9 months after Katrina, and our job as, you know, 20 somethings with no clue at all was to rip down houses down to the studs. That's what FEMA was having us do, was going through, you know, and they would give us protection, I guess, respiratory protection of some kind. And they'd give you a hammer and say, go ahead and tear this thing down to the studs, because this particular, and we would only do it on houses that didn't have flood insurance. That's typically how that worked. And they'd put us up but that was 9 months after Katrina, and you'd have nothing had changed. Nothing had been touched. People had gone and had not come back. And so that's what we were doing.
And everything.
Oh yeah, all the fun stuff. But, you know, and I suspect you'll have something similar happen, where you're going to have people that'll come in waves, and as time goes on, and they will come and they will help rebuild, and it'll take some time. But I always find those things really encouraging, you know, to see people coming together who don't know each other at all, don't know anything about it, but they just want to help. I mean, I'd never been in New Orleans. I just wanted to help. And I think that, I suspect you'll keep seeing that. We saw that in Kentucky, people from out of state, from in-state, people who didn't know anybody showing up and helping out how they could. And it's really encouraging, and see that side of humanity.
It is encouraging.
So Gary, I know we are at noon, but I had a wait what moment. So it is wait, what? So Mr. Kansas does not have a shelter underground shelter in your backyard in Charlotte. I mean, come
Dude.
on.
I grew up in a house that did not have a basement, and we would run across the street to the house that had a basement in the hail. And finally, my dad paid to have an excavator come under our existing house, and they built a basement. And that was like, nightmares started going away because of it. But yeah, I mean, yeah, we've lived through that.
Yeah, I was launched into one when we were in Kansas years ago because, as you know, my grandfather-in-law was a wheat farmer, and so tornado came through, and we were watching, and all of a sudden it's like, get into the shelter, and like, what? And it got dark really quickly, and you could hear the wind, and then it was like, okay, and then the sun came out, and it was like, no big deal. It's like, okay, I guess that's normal, and apparently it is. So yeah, I had that
Yeah,
experience. It was lovely.
yeah. When Josiah was a little kid, a mile-wide tornado wiped out half of my wife's little town of 3,000 people. And here's the amazing thing, like gas lines spewing and all that kind of stuff, but not one person lost their life. And there were people in a Pizza Hut on a slab, and they went into the walk-in cooler, and they came out, they all lived, and there was nothing, cement slab, and everything else was blown away. Nobody lost their lives. I mean, it was miraculous. And my father-in-law watched it from his porch, so crazy. Anyway, hey guys, thank you for taking time out of your day. Josiah, thank you. And thank you, the state of Kentucky, Go Blue, for allowing you to have an hour to do this with us. For anybody that wants to see a replay, go back to the BGW CPA YouTube channel. It'll be up this afternoon. And same way Shoemaker has the same thing on their YouTube channel. Adam, Jack, Josiah, thank you guys. Thank you everybody for being in Romper Room with us again today. And week 228, we'll probably go deeper into some of the programs as far as lending and other things that are available next week, and whatever else Jack and Adam decide that we need to talk about. All right.
See you guys. Thanks, Josiah.
See y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yes,
y'all.
definitely.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Y'all have a good one.